Gavin Newsom has started a podcast, finally complying with the law that mandates that every white dude in America either host or co-host one before his death. I'm sure that the American psycho-looking governor is going to be a great host as well. He's as polished and as slick as any politician has ever come, and he's already doing the smart thing for his inevitable presidential run and tacking to the center. His biggest problem is that his party hates moderation. Polling suggests that when Newsom has taken some common sense positions on his show, things like men shouldn't play in women's sports, it causes Democratic voters to become so frustrated they want to impeach him and charge him with 96 felonies. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Well, hello, people. We have some fun topics this week, a couple smaller ones and then one big one in the middle that we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about Gavin Newsom and his new podcast. We're going to talk about Donald Trump in the courts, which is obviously going to be a big topic because there's a lot of stuff in the news this week about our dictator-in-chief, they call him. And we're going to talk about Vladimir Putin, which is always fun. But first, before we get into all that, let's do our favorite comment from last week. Our favorite comment comes from Nick Lynx, who said, and this is the quote, "Disingenuous, emotive language, trying to sway your audience's opinions. You're the one that seems based here," end quote. Now, I think it's meant to be an insult. However, I am based. I think that people maybe don't know what that word means, and I think it's funny that that's exactly what I am, which basically, I don't know how I would define based as a word, but I had a couple people ask me if I misspoke in the title of the video, if I meant biased. And I don't mean biased, I meant based, because based is basically the Republican word, or the coded Republican word for someone who's conservative. So no, I didn't mean biased. I meant based. I thought that maybe he meant biased. He's saying I'm biased, which I absolutely am biased. I have an opinion. That's what this is. This is not journalism, people. This is not what I do. I'm not out here trying to uncover the stories and bring you the breaking news. That's not what I do. I report on the news, and I tell you what I think about it. That's kind of the deal here on the Chrestman Conversation. I'm not a reporter in any sense of the word. That's not what I do. So, yeah, I'm a little based, I'm a little biased, and that's kind of the way it is, and I think it's a good thing. Anyway, let's get on to topic one. Gavin Newsom joins the podcast game. So, Gavin Newsom, I know not everyone out there follows politics as closely. You probably don't know the governors of most states. If you don't live in that state, you might not even know the governor of your state if you live in or wherever you're living, and that's okay. Gavin Newsom, though, he's a national player. He's a big state. California's big. It's an important state. You know, we're not talking about Wyoming. This is a state with a lot of people. This is a state that has a lot of money, and it's a very controversial state because it's one of the more radical states in terms of policy. The way people think about Texas as Republican or as Ron DeSantis has made Florida more conservative, that's the way people think about California and New York in terms of liberal nonsense. So Gavin Newsom's a big player, and obviously he wants to run for president. And so he started a podcast. Somehow he's going to get his image out there because COVID did not do him any favors. COVID hurt Gavin Newsom's reputation in a big way. The trip to the French Laundry during the lockdowns in California did not help him at all. It's just little things like that can sink your presidential hopes and aspirations, and that little thing is going to haunt him forever. So he started a podcast, and my guess is it's actually a very, very smart idea on his part because it allows him to separate himself from a lot of the nonsense that's going on in the Democratic Party. So his first guests are two conservatives that he has on. He has Charlie Kirk on, who I'm sure many of you who listen to this show probably know who Charlie Kirk is, the founder of Turning Point USA. He's big on college campuses. He's one of President Trump's top allies. He's a young guy. I think he might be slightly younger than myself, but he's young. When he started getting into politics when he was 19, he didn't go to college or dropped out of college and started Turning Point USA, which the whole point of Turning Point USA in the beginning was to go on college campuses and basically try and convince people that conservatives had good points. He was one of those early pioneers of internet politics that in this new era of YouTube and podcasts and all that. Not talking about the early internet, but in the 2010s, it became important to start understanding the algorithms of social media companies. And he's one of those guys who understood how to do this and how to build a base and how to build this system. And he's an interesting guy. But Gavin Newsom, his first two people are Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk. These are two conservatives. And I think, as I just said, I think he's doing a smart thing here. Because I think what everyone recognizes now, every smart player in the Democratic Party recognizes now, is that the tactics that they have been working on for the past decade, maybe a little longer, maybe last 15 years, since, I guess, yeah, that would make sense, since about 2012, since Obama's second election, the tactics that they have been trying are not working in the way that we think they are. Hillary Clinton lost in 2016. The 2020 election, I don't want to talk about it. All right, COVID happened. It wasn't a typical election. It was an outlier. Whatever you think of that election, it's not indicative of how people vote because it doesn't make any sense. And then 2024 happens, and Donald Trump wins again. So the Republicans have won the last two elections, in my opinion. Not talking about 2020, because, again, it's an outlier. There were, 13, 14 million more voters than there were in 2024. And I think that we can assume that there was some things, even if you're not saying fraud, I think we can say there are some things that just stand out about that election that are not typical. But the Republicans won. Donald Trump won the popular vote for president in this election. And the Democratic Party has not done a good job of handling this, because you can't say in 2025 that the majority of people who voted for Donald Trump just have to be motivated by racism or sexism, some sort of misogyny or xenophobia. That's all they have, is that they want to say that everyone who votes for Donald Trump just hates people. And really, the only people we hate are the people in the Democratic Party who make policy. Those are the people that we really don't like. It has nothing to do with animus towards a group of people. But that's all the Democrats have to offer, is just that they're the party of love, and the Republicans are big meanies, and Donald Trump's orange Hitler. That's all the Democrats have. There's no good ideas coming from that party. And Gavin Newsom sees that. The American voters do not register with the Democratic Party line at this point. And the biggest things about this are just easy issues that Democrats right now can't handle. And a great one is things like, should illegal immigrants who commit crimes be deported? When you look at polling among Democrats, or you ask Democrats in Congress to answer this question, they will either run away or say no, and the American people don't like that answer. It's not a 55-45 issue. This is an 80-20 issue. This is an issue where almost all Americans think if an illegal alien is here, they commit crime, they should be deported. But Democrats can't say that, so they won't. The one I gave in the opening, men and women's sports, that's an 80-20 issue. Most people believe that looking at a guy who's 6'3", playing volleyball with a bunch of tall women, and tall women are like my height. They're 5'10", 5'11". That's a tall woman. And you're watching this guy who towers over them play with volleyball with them. You know, this guy with 5 o'clock shadow and who wants to be a woman. Hey, go live your life. But most people recognize that's unfair. There's nothing there that's fair about that in competition, in the spirit of competition. And Democrats can't get a handle on these kind of issues. They think it's mean to point that out. It's not mean. It's just common sense. And so a guy like Gavin Newsom, who is smart, he's slick, he's polished, he wants to win, and he wants to be president. And he has the look of a guy who could be president. He looks like a guy who could win elections. And he, he's a handsome dude. He conducts himself well, and he will lie as easily as breathe. So he makes a great politician. And this podcast that he's on gives him an opportunity to separate himself away from the Democratic Party. Now, again, because he lies so easily, he can pretend that he hasn't been one of the most radical people in the Democratic Party. He can pretend that all this stuff, all the the transgender overboard, the COVID school closures. He can pretend away all of that stuff on his podcast and basically just reinvent himself, which is what he's going to do. Is this idea that he's going to tack to the center and try and fill the vacuum for 2028. And I think people right now think it's not going to work. I think it will work. I think that there will be a time in the next 4 years that people are going to forget, and they're going to remember this reinvented Gavin Newsom instead of the guy who closed schools in California for 2 years longer than they needed to be closed. Instead of the guy who tried to mandate that you wear masks on the beach and close the paddleboard sessions. They're not going to remember that guy. They're going to remember this guy who's willing to talk to Republicans and have the hard conversations and all this nonsense. And I think it could work. It's a great idea for 2028. He's obviously moving himself towards the middle, eyeing a presidential run. He thinks he can fill this vacuum. And there is a vacuum there in the Democratic Party. Who are the leaders of the Democratic Party? Where are the moderates? Where do they exist? Who are they? And you look around and you say, well, the people who are famous in the Democratic Party are not moderates, and they're not the people who win national elections. Bernie Sanders is not going to win a national election. AOC is not going to win a national election. This new lady from Texas, Jasmine Crockett, she's not going to win a national election. Kamala Harris couldn't win a national election. Tim Walz is not going to win a national election. And so you say, well, who are they? It's Pete Buttigieg. He's not going to win. He's not going to win. It has nothing to do with him being gay. It has to do with the fact that people don't like him. Black people don't like him. But if black people don't like you, you're definitely not going to win Democratic votes. I don't know what to tell you. When 85% of black people vote Democrat, if they don't like you, which according to all the polling, they don't like Pete Buttigieg, then you're not going to win. So there's not a lot of people in the Democratic Party who are looking like stars who could challenge whoever, probably J.D. Vance, for the inevitable nomination. And so this is a way to distinguish himself because he's already got national name recognition. He already is one of those people who, because he's the governor of a large state, he has a larger national platform than most people. And he's going to politic that into something more. And I think tagging to the center is good for everybody. I think that the Democratic Party has gone extreme on some issues, and if they just forget about those issues for a second, forget about the cultural issues, forget about saying that trans people and black people are dying in the streets left and right and America hates them and this and that. I look around, I know a lot of conservatives. I don't know anyone who just has some sort of absolute hatred for groups of people that aren't white Christians. I don't know those people. And I know a lot of people who consider themselves conservatives. I don't know conservatives to be motivated by hate. And so Democrats just need to run away from this narrative. They're not doing themselves any favors. And Gavin Newsom, by doing that, is very smart. And I think that this podcast idea of his could work. I don't know if his podcast is going to be popular. I don't know if anyone's going to listen to it. But it's going to be able to then allow him to point back and say, I'm willing to talk to Republicans. I don't think Republicans are evil and blah, blah, blah. And so you'll get some of those Bernie Sanders voters that actually voted for Donald Trump maybe to turn back and say, well, this guy's not crazy. I can vote for him. And who knows? We'll see. It's a long way off before 2028. There's going to be a lot of things that happen. But I think I was going to take bets. If you're taking long shot bets at a 4-year bet, betting that Gavin Newsom will capture the nomination, he's got to be the front runner at this particular junction. And I know Democrats right now, you look at polling, they don't like him. They don't like this new turn. But I think that when you get the actual people who want to win elections and not just want people to die on their ideological shield, when you get those people and they look at who can win, he can win. He can be a guy who's effective. He's always had that ability to win. And so we'll see how it works out for him. As I said, I think it could be a good idea. I think that turning towards the center this early allows you to say, this is really me, because by the time 3 years go by, people are going to forget. COVID's going to have been 7 years in the past, and people have a short memory for things like that. People already forgot how bad the Democrats were on COVID, and I haven't, because I will never forget The day that I stopped voting for the Democrats was the day that Joe Biden tried to get me fired from my job. And I won't forget that. It got struck down in the courts, but Joe Biden signed an order that would have gotten me fired from the place that I work because I didn't comply with the vaccine mandate that he wanted to force down on us. And I won't forget that. I'm not going to forget that that was the Democratic Party. They supported these kind of things that would have caused 80 million Americans to have to get a vaccine or face termination in their employment. And I'm not going to forget that kind of stuff, that how tyrannical they were when it came to COVID. And I think a lot of people will, though. And over the course of the next 5-6 years, people are just going to forget that it was like that. And Gavin Newsom is going to be one of those guys who was the worst on COVID. No one's going to care. And he's going to have 4 years of him being able to point out, well, I have been more sane on things like transgenderism. I haven't touched the racial stuff. That's not really me. I'm not that kind of politician. I'm just a working class Democrat, blue dog Democrat who wants people to get back to work and fix up the American economy. If he runs like that, it's going to be dangerous. So who knows? We'll see. Anyway, that was supposed to be our short topic because I just wanted to touch on it because I thought it was interesting, but that lasted a little longer. Anyway, let's get on to topic 2, Donald Trump and the courts. If you watch the news, if you're watching the corporate press this week, basically you'll know we're on the brink of total tyranny, and Donald Trump is trying to position himself as king, emperor, and I mean, democracy, we're on the cusp. You know that. If you watch the news this week, you know. And it's all because Donald Trump is defying the courts now. He's out there trying to be the only branch of government. He's taken over the judiciary, and he's going to just completely shred the Constitution. Now, that's the narrative. That's the narrative going around because of this story this week. Basically, for those of you who don't watch the news, the smart people out there who don't watch the news because it's just all nonsense, there were 130 Venezuelan illegal immigrants who Donald Trump was set to deport. Now, Venezuela wouldn't take them back. Now, these are criminals, by the way. They're not just illegal immigrants. These are gang members who Donald Trump rounded up. 130 gang members. I can't remember. It's obviously some Spanish name. Nope, it's not going to come to me. There's a Spanish gang. Nasty, nasty reputation. And these Venezuelans were all a part of that gang. And so Donald Trump had them arrested, or they were already arrested, and he's going to deport them back to Venezuela. Venezuela says no. El Salvador volunteers. I'm sure we're giving them some sort of monetary incentive, but they volunteer to take them in. So Donald Trump sends these Venezuelans to El Salvador on a plane to go to prison in El Salvador, which, believe me, not something you want to do. El Salvador is not known for their niceties when it comes to their prison system. So these Venezuelans are getting flown out of here. And a district judge named James Boasberg suspended that order and ordered the flights to be turned around. They obviously, the Trump administration was getting sued. It goes to court. This U.S. district judge Boasberg, ordered that the flights turn around. He says, this can't happen, and that's where we stood. Now, this is nonsense just on its face. The fact that a district judge, I think it's silly that a district judge in one district has the ability to put a national injunction on executive policy. I don't understand how this is the case. This it's never made sense to me how one judge can hold up an entire administration's worth of work because they say that it doesn't work. I don't get that. The Supreme Court should be able to do that. But a district judge should just say, I don't know. I don't understand how is that? I guess since the 60s, that's really been the case. And really the idea of judicial review doesn't even come from the Constitution itself. That judicial review of executive policy, it didn't start till the 1800s. Now, it came in the early 1800s, so it came early, but it's a right that the courts granted themselves. There's a decision. Happened in, what year was that? Happened in 1803. And it's called Marbury versus Madison. And basically, the reason why this Supreme Court decision... Oh, my gosh. Sorry about that. My phone was going off. And the reason why this decision is important is because it granted the Supreme Court the ability for judicial review, which basically means that they get to review policy, they get to review procedures, and they get to determine what is and is not constitutional. And it's an ability that they granted themselves. So that's kind of their role in the Constitution, but it wasn't defined well until Marbury versus Madison, where they basically had this power of judicial review. A district court judge should not have the power to just stop executive order policy, especially on things like foreign policy, where his executive function is clearly defined in the Constitution. He has the ability, the president has the ability to control foreign policy and the border. 100%. That is as clear as anything in the Constitution. So this judge, he orders basically the planes that have the Venezuelans to turn around, which is not really how planes work. They only have a certain amount of fuel. They don't just turn around midair and go back. So his order came, by the way, at 1845. It's 6:45 in the evening for those of you who are paying attention. The planes were already in the air. They landed in Honduras at 1936 and 2002. So it's not that they took off or that he ignored the orders. They were already in the air. They're not turning around. They're in international waters, which was the argument, and they basically had to. The Trump administration basically said that because they're over international waters, because they're already in there, they're going to land. They're going to go where they were designed to go. So, and by the way, they stopped in Honduras and then went on to El Salvador. So apparently, but the big problem was another plane took off slightly after this order came out. Again, a district judge issues an order and the entire government is supposed to just be aware of it in real time. Just seems silly to me. And I don't know how the judge even thinks that is realistic. But these planes landed, they're already this. But people are saying, the Democratic Party is saying, and the corporate media is saying that Donald Trump ignored the courts. He's ignoring the courts. The courts gave an order, and Donald Trump just said no. And this is terrible, and how could this happen, and this is how tyranny happens. And I think that it's just a silly argument because, again, that's not how planes work, first of all. But secondly, why can a district court judge just effectively stop policy for the entire United States, for 350 million people? One judge who's a political appointee. You make no mistake. Judges are supposed to be unbiased. They're supposed to follow the law, and that's why Lady Justice wears a blindfold. They're supposed to be blind. They're not supposed to come in there with things. But they're political appointees. They're appointed by presidents, and presidents have political leanings. They pick judges who share their constitutional view, and those constitutional views are linked to the way you view things politically. There's not a lot of progressives who are constitutional originalists. They're not textualists, right? They don't believe, for example, that the Constitution's a dead document, like I do. You're not going to find that, because progressives believe it's a living document, and it should be reinterpreted and reexamined under the lens of new modern policy. And I just can't disagree with that enough. But again, that's just illustrating that if I was to appoint a judge, I would find someone who viewed the Constitution the way I do, and that's coded for the way that you view politics. So judges are political appointees. And why should one political appointee be able to stop the entire government? It doesn't make any sense. Stephen Miller, who's a senior advisor to President Trump, had a pretty great quote, or he basically points this out. He said, quote, "Without doubt, the most unlawful order a judge has issued in our lifetimes. A district court judge has no authority to direct national security operations of the executive branch," end quote. That is 100% right. Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president authority over foreign policy and the border. It is as clear as anything in the Constitution. Why should one district court judge be able to stop that? And why is the corporate media acting as though Donald Trump is doing something completely out of the realm of possibility by not ignoring it, but just saying the obvious thing, which is that those planes already left. I can't bring them back. That's not the way it works. And why is this a bad idea? What does a district court judge think the president doesn't have the ability to deport people, especially under the act that they're doing? Oh, what is it called? The Alien... I can't remember if these Venezuelans were deported under the Alien Immigration Act, the Alien and Nationality. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's like Donald Trump very clearly has this spelled out. And I love Tom Homan got asked. They said, "Oh, what do you say to the people who say you're using an old law?" I think this act is from the late 1700s or early 1800s. It's a very old law. And his response was perfect. He said, "The Constitution's older. We kind of follow that, don't we?" And that's a great answer. And it's also, by the way, I've always said, if you have old laws on the books that we don't follow, they should come off. They should come off the books. The idea, so, you'll see these silly things sometimes where it'll be like, oh, in Alabama, you can't have more than 3 chickens in your ox cart when you roll down the town square. And it's a law that's still on the books. This is silly. You should not have these kind of laws. I know they're funny and they're not a real big deal, but they are kind of a big deal because you should follow the law. And if the law is the law, then everything on the books, every law in the books should be something worth policing and something that we take seriously. So when we have these silly laws that we don't follow, we should get rid of them. This is not one of those silly laws. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it is a law. It's on the books. That means it's still valid. It's still a thing that you can do. The president still has the authority to deport people labeled domestic terrorists, and I think Venezuelan gangs qualify, just like I think cartel members qualify as terrorists. They are killing Americans in large numbers. 100,000 Americans a year die of overdoses from fentanyl, and that is almost exclusively brought into the country by the cartels. So the cartels are terrorist organizations who are killing Americans by the hundreds of thousands. And so you say, yeah, the president has that authority, and no district court judge should be able to question that authority on a national scale and stop national security operations. It doesn't make any sense. And I'd be interested to see how the Supreme Court reacts to this. I think this idea that district court judges can put national injunctions on policy, I think that's going to come to a stop. I think the Supreme Court is going to say that this is not really how the system is designed, and political appointees should not be able to hold up the work of 3 million people with the stroke of a pen because they were appointed by Barack Obama. And so I think that that'll be interesting. I think that'll be good, and we'll see that. This is obviously going to go to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what plays out. But Donald Trump's not defying the Constitution. He's not defying the court. He's not trying to take things over. Like, let's stop being dramatic out there. This is not a constitutional crisis. It's no different than when the Supreme Court said Joe Biden wasn't allowed to unilaterally alleviate student debt, and then he continued to try and do it. I didn't see everyone saying, Joe Biden's defying the courts. It's a threat to democracy. But he did it multiple times. And the courts had to keep saying, hey, we said no. And he had to go, but I figured out a different way because I have this law. And the courts would go, no, you don't have the authority. He did it like 3 times after the courts told him no. So I'm not going to say Joe Biden was a dictator. That'd be silly. But neither is Donald Trump. Let's just knock it off. I don't understand people who were too much into the Donald Trump presidency, and they just can't let go of the idea that he is just such a unique threat. Oh my God, it's so terrible. I don't know what you're looking at, and I'm trying to, but I don't understand it. And you know what? Actually, as I say that, it's probably this next topic. It's probably topic 3, which is Putin and Trump, because so many of those Democrats still believe in the Russian narrative. And I don't want to talk about Donald Trump and Russia and the Russia hoax, but for those people like myself who actually took time to try and understand the Mueller report and what happened and Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and tried to understand that entire thing, it's important to remember that the Mueller report is 2 parts. The first part is about Russian collusion. The second part is about obstruction of justice. And Donald Trump, there is nothing in the Mueller report that says Donald Trump and Russia colluded. They didn't completely exonerate him. They didn't say no. But what they said is there's no evidence to support this claim. We don't have any evidence that supports a Russian collusion between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They didn't say none exists, but they said all the evidence that was brought forth to us, we can't, this is not something that there's a actual crime here. There's no conviction. There's no anything. You could say, well, they shouldn't have had a meeting with Russia. And okay, but there's absolutely nothing that says that Donald Trump was some stooge put forth by the Kremlin to become president. This is not some Manchurian candidate. The Mueller report basically said there's nothing that exists that we can point to say that this was actually a crime or actually untoward or whatever the case may be. The second part of the Russian report, the Mueller report, is about obstruction of justice. And they said Donald Trump may have been guilty of obstruction of justice on an investigation into a crime that doesn't exist. And the obstruction of justice, the only thing that they have is that Donald Trump would ask if he's allowed to fire people. Am I allowed to fire whoever it is, this guy or that guy? And then people would say, maybe, but you probably shouldn't. And then he didn't. He did. So it just strikes me as amazing that people think Russia collusion and Donald Trump is what a criminal. He's Vladimir Putin's best friend. Nothing has ever proven that. And I encourage everyone out there, go look at the Mueller report. You don't have to read it. It's like 600 pages. Find a summary. Try and find the worst, dirtiest piece of evidence that you can find, and it doesn't exist. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are not best friends. But it has been very important for the president coming into his second term to get a ceasefire in Ukraine. That's very important for him. So this phone call between him and Vladimir Putin, it received a lot of press because it's the first one in the second term. And Putin started it off in a very disrespectful way. He was 1 hour late for the phone call, which is obviously intentional. He's obviously trying to get Donald Trump and play a little bit of a power game here. And I think that would be it's a bad move. It's disrespectful to the office. I think after about 5 minutes, if you're Donald Trump, you say, I got other things to do, and you walk away. If someone's going to be late for a phone call with you, no. I understand you want a ceasefire, but no. That's a power game, to be late and make someone wait. And Donald Trump kind of, again, Putin's going to play games, and it's just the way that he is. He's that kind of guy. And Donald Trump shouldn't play games with him. So anyway, let's talk about the actual phone call, though. Donald Trump wants a ceasefire in Ukraine, and it would be a giant political win if he manages to organize a peace between Ukraine and Russia, because Joe Biden wasn't able to do it for years and years and years. So this phone call was, obviously the details that are put out are not 100% in Donald Trump's favor, but they're okay. Vladimir Putin agreed to a 30-day ceasefire on the energy infrastructure. He basically said, we're not going to bomb gas plants. We're not going to hurt the infrastructure of Ukraine. Ukraine also agreed. But then right after the meeting, I think a gasoline plant, I can't remember, Vladimir Putin bombed a piece of energy infrastructure in Ukraine. And they could say, oh, well, that was already scheduled to happen. Sorry, my bad. But it's not true. It's because Vladimir Putin is going to lie. He's going to be the kind of person who will say, yeah, we're not going to hit energy infrastructure, and then bombs all the gas and diesel plants that you have in the country. So, yes, Donald Trump organized a 30-day ceasefire, but we'll see if Russia holds to that. Ukraine, how do you get to a peaceful arrangement in Ukraine? It's an incredibly difficult question, and one that doesn't have an easy answer, that's for sure. Ukraine, though, right now today, holds a little piece of a bargaining chip, and it's because they launched an offensive into Russia and captured what's that region called? The Kursk region in Russia. They own a little bit of land, and right now, maybe as part of a deal, they could give up that piece of land and get back some of their land, and you come to this thing. Ukraine's not going to win. Russia's not going to win. They all have to lose something, and just to organize a peace. But right now at this moment, Ukraine is losing. They're losing ground. They're going to lose this region of Russia. And I think the United States is doing a bad thing by not supplying Ukraine a little bit more so they can hold on to these gains so that they have a bargaining chip. If they lose that, they don't have anything to offer Russia in exchange for peace, because Russia owns, obviously, the regions of Ukraine that they've taken over. And I think that it would be a bad idea for the U.S. to allow Ukraine to just flat out lose this war. Russia's playing games. Vladimir Putin said that his peace deal is contingent on the United States not rearming Ukraine or Ukraine not rearming and basically promising no more involvement. It's like these are things that are never going to happen. Ukraine would never agree to this. So when you come out to the table and we're having a negotiation and it's going well, and then I make an off-the-wall thing that I know the other side will never agree to, and I make it that's the deal. Well, clearly I don't want to make a deal because I'm saying, well, no, I want, this deal is well and good, but also you have to give me your firstborn son. And I make that the deal. And you say, well, I'm not going to do that. That's silly. Why would I ever agree to this? And you say, well, that's clearly you don't want to make a deal if you won't give me your firstborn child. No, obviously I don't want to make a deal, but I'm making a demand in a way that makes it seem like you don't want to make a deal because you're the one who's not agreeing. I'm being reasonable. I came with demands, and I put my offer on the table, and you're just flat out rejecting it. Well, that's what Ukraine's going to do, and Vladimir Putin knows this. Vladimir Putin knows Ukraine can't promise not to rearm. What kind of a deal would that be for them? They can't say we're not going to get more weapons and restock our troops and be prepared for when you attack us again. And Vladimir Putin knows this. It's a non-starter, this kind of deal. And he knows. He knows this, and it's Donald Trump's job because Donald Trump said he's going to make a deal. Day one, he said he could make a deal between Russia and Ukraine. And he knows that this would be a big hit for him politically if he can't figure out a way to do it. So Vladimir Putin understands this. He understands leverage. He has the leverage. And the longer this war goes on, the better it is for Vladimir Putin because it doesn't hurt him in the way that we thought it was going to. Not in the same way that we thought, it's going to degrade his military. It's going to bankrupt his country. I don't think it's going that way. I think he's doing okay. And I think if this war continues, it's worse for Ukraine. And he recognizes this. And if it gets worse for Ukraine, it allows him to get what he ultimately wants, which is control of that country. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I don't want Ukraine to lose this war because that would be bad. You didn't start the war. It's really not their fault. Russia's the bad one in this situation, the worst one. I don't love Ukraine as a country, but Russia's worse, and Vladimir Putin's worse than Zelensky, regardless of what you think of Zelensky. And so I think this would be bad if we allow Ukraine to lose. So Trump needs to make sure that doesn't happen. And hopefully because that would sink his presidency. The way Afghanistan sank Joe Biden, losing in Ukraine would sink Donald Trump's presidency because it would just further that narrative that he's a Russian stooge, and he would never shake it. And he would, and for all the things that people could say about how Joe Biden, that disaster in Afghanistan, if Ukraine folds and becomes part of Russia, or Zelensky is killed, and Vladimir Putin basically puts a stooge in there to be president of Ukraine, then that's a loss for Donald Trump. It's a loss for the world, but it's a loss for Donald Trump that he won't recover from. So we can't let that happen. We have to make sure Ukraine stays in the fight. Anyway, I think it's a weird week in the news, and I'm interested to see where these stories go. I'm interested in seeing how the Supreme Court plays out the national junctions, and I'm interested to see where this Russia-Ukraine thing goes. I think Donald Trump's supposed to have some more conversations, and hopefully we get the ball rolling because I'm sick of talking about Ukraine, really. And we'll see. I don't know. It's like I said, it's a strange week. It was a weird week in the news because I felt like there were some big stories, but none of them, they all seem so mundane. And it's weird because I guess Donald Trump normally sweeps in a cyclone of craziness, but this week has been sort of tame by Donald Trump standards. So anyway, we are going to leave it there for the day. And as always, I hope you guys, questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and leave them down in the comments. We will address them on next week's show. I always am looking for good suggestions for topics. This week, like I said, I was having a hard time with some topics this week. And we'll see. We'll see next week what it has in store for us. But I always love suggestions for good topics. And we'll keep it there. As always, I'm Tyler Chrestman. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will catch you next Friday.